Okay, kia ora. My name's Dave Kennedy. I've been gardening most of my life, so I'm in my 60s, but I didn't probably start gardening till I was about 8 or 9. And I'm no expert, but I've been living in the same property for 27 years, and I think I've accumulated a little bit of knowledge over that time that I'm quite happy to share. And so this whole video is really about urban gardening. And so what's possible in an urban section. We've got a large section, it's 1/4 of an acre. Some people don't have that luxury, but you can grow anything within reason in even a small section. So this is the entrance to our property. We've got a north facing section, so this is the south end of their garden, so we're quite lucky to have a house facing into the north garden. When we first arrived, most of the front of this property was in lawn, and we planted a lot of natives. So most people think of gardening as being flowers and vegetables, but I think that more people should think about planting natives, because not only do they attract native birds and look attractive, but there are actually some actual uses for different native plants. You can see over here we've got karamu, which is part of the Parsnips family, and it's actually related to coffee. You can actually eat those little berries when they're yellow, and some people have actually tried to make roast the seeds and make a coffee like drink, which I don't think it was entirely successful because the seeds are so small, but it definitely does have a coffee flavour. And at our entrance we've got two rather old cabbage trees, or tiwhanaki, I think it's called in Māori, and some people curse them because the leaves drop everywhere and they get tangled in the lawnmower. But I think if you look at them in a different way, apparently the inside of the trunk is edible. It's not something that I'd be necessarily keen to try, but we do use the leaves as a fire starter. They burn really well. I also use, by stripping down thin bits, you can actually make garden ties. If you twist them each time as you plait them, it makes a really strong garden tie. And my wife's recently learnt how to make baskets. You do have to soak the dry leaves for about 3 days to soften them up, but there are uses for the cabbage tree leaf. So there's other plants down here. You'll see on the right hand side there's koramiko. We've got kofi as we walk through. They attract the birds. Kofi is poisonous though, that's not an edible plant. And we've got some tree ferns, harakiki, or the ponga, and I understand some of these plants, including koramiko, is quite useful for dealing with dysentery, so they do have their uses. So if we just walk through to the main part of the garden. Just excuse the untidiness of our carport, but you can see here we collect firewood from where we trim branches and so forth. My philosophy is that I want as little as possible to leave the section. We don't like to have waste. So twigs and things we use for kindling. And several years ago we had quite a serious drought. We've got very sandy soil and most of our section burnt off and we lost some mature trees. So I recently bought this tank and hope to connect it to the shed, you can see in the background, to provide a water supply if a similar thing happens. So walking through to the main part of the garden, just take you to our herb garden. So we did site this elsewhere, and I decided to shift it so it was closer to the kitchen. The kitchen's just through this door here. Most herbs are perennials. You don't have to replant them. You do have to trim them back at the end of each season after they've flowered. For winter time you can cut them right back hard and they'll come away again. Other herbs like parsley tend to go to seed, and you often they're annuals and you have to replant them. But we've got a good number of herbs. Probably the ones that we use more of are things like rosemary, marjoram and oregano. Parsley, of course, we use quite a bit of. We've also got a number of different kinds of mint. There's chocolate mint, spearmint, ordinary mint, of course, goes really nicely with potatoes. And we have a basil mint. Basil, sweet basil, is sometimes temperamental and hard to grow, but basil mint is really hardy, and you can still make pesto and things that you normally use basil for with basil mint. We've got garlic chives, ordinary chives, tarragon goes really well with mushrooms. A new herb that we've just started using is Vietnamese coriander. It has a kind of a coriander flavour that's a bit spicy, got a hint of heat to it. Also lemongrass we've just started growing and using as well. And you can see over here we've got aloe vera. We've also got kaffir lime, and I've got a barrel here full of strawberry plants, and that tends to do better than our main strawberry garden because I think it gets more sun. And in the background you can see we've got English lavender. So there are edible flowers that you can eat and put in salads. Lavender can be used, my wife makes really nice shortbread with English lavender, and you can use nasturtiums and violets and pansies in salads as well. They've got quite a delicate flavour. Also borage, this is borage over here, and borage, little blue flowers that you can see there. Some people put them inside ice cubes or decorate salads with them as well. In terms of making tea or herbal drinks, one of our favourites is actually over here. We've got lemon verbena. It grows to quite a large tree, but the leaves got a really lovely lemony flavour, and you can put it with cold water to give it a lemony taste, and it makes a really nice drink. We've got lemon balm as well, but I think I prefer lemon verbena. Sometimes I just grow herbs because of their colour. I mean, we do use a bit of sage, but the purple sage looks nicer than ordinary sage. It's got a bit of colour to it. We've got some lemon balm there too. So that's our herb garden. Just behind we've got, I think, 13 different kinds of fruit bearing bushes and trees. This is a plum. We lost a large plum here recently when the fence was put into the property when the people beside subdivided. So this hasn't really produced much as yet, but we're hoping it'll produce as much as the original plum we had here. And as we move down towards the vegetable garden, this is called the New Zealand Cranberry. It's actually a small guava that comes from South America. Still not quite ripe yet. When the berries turn a more of a pinky colour, they're really quite nice. You can make a whole lot of different things with them. And you can also use them as a hedge. They can be decorative and be used to make different rooms in the garden, perhaps as a hedge. Right, getting down. So this time of year, autumn, there's lots of leaves. I sometimes rake them up. If the grass isn't growing particularly much, you can put them into your compost. You can also make leaf mulch by just putting them in a mound somewhere, and they start to break down, a really good mulch. So those are the leaves. We move through to areas where most of our fruit trees are. You can see on the left hand side there, most of these trees I did have a large strawberry tree here, and it got too large, and I realised that the birds were dropping seeds and so forth, and these natives were coming through. So this is kind of the centre of the fruit growing area. Our strawberry bed's a bit overgrown at the moment, but I don't mind. The strawberries are finished. Some of the runners that the strawberries produce I'll remove and pot for the next season, but because I use pea straw, we've got a number of peas coming through, so that's kind of a bonus. I just leave them there and eat the peas. I've got rhubarb, blueberries, raspberries. We've got 3 different kinds of apple. This tree was 3 different varieties grafted onto the one rootstock, and I've since discovered that it doesn't really work that well, and the main surviving trees are a little Cox Orange, which is quite a nice little eating apple, so I've just left that one. Got 2 different kinds of pears. I just planted those recently, and in behind we've got red currants, black currants, gooseberry bushes. I think that's most of the fruit at this point. Of course, the rhubarb I think I might have mentioned before too. So moving round to the greenhouse. So greenhouses you come in a variety of sizes, and if you haven't got a large section, just a small one can actually grow a variety of food. So in our greenhouse, I mainly grow sort of heritage or different tomatoes that you don't find in the supermarket, and we grow sweet peppers. I sometimes grow lettuces over winter time, keeps the supply of lettuces. They don't survive very well in frosts, and cucumbers, sweet basil, and we've got a red grape that's just about coming to this point where we can eat them at the moment. So a really useful space. If you're keen on growing things from seed, you can start growing seeds of different plants from about August, and I'll explain a little bit later how you can produce a good seed compost. So just to give an idea what sort of things we're harvesting at the moment, this is the main harvesting time for most vegetable gardens. So we didn't have a very successful year with pumpkins this year, but we did get a large kumi. I'm quite a fan of small pumpkins. These don't grow particularly large, but they do mature quicker than the larger ones, and when there's just 2 in our household, they work out quite well. So I've got beans, tomatoes, cucumbers, cabbage, this apple. Robin Guyton's trying to identify it for me. I bought it years ago and forgot what it was. It's got quite a waxy feel to the skin, but it's a really lovely eating apple. And corn is getting past it now. These are some of the last cobs that we're feeding to our hen. So we've also got a hen. We normally have 2, and they provide us with more than enough eggs. So if we move around through here, so you can probably see that there's some large trees to the north on neighbours' properties, which means that our garden is most productive in the middle of summer, and once the sun starts to drop we lose a bit of sun and our garden slows down a little bit. So our courgettes and zucchini and pumpkins are more or less over, but I've got some Jerusalem artichokes. This is the first time I've planted those, and we're looking forward to seeing what they're like. One thing that I do kind of encourage people to think about is companion planting. We often have marigolds, which are good for ridding the soil of pests. I mainly grow them though because of the colour that they add, and I tried growing some nasturtiums in amongst these runner beans just here, but I'm afraid they haven't been very productive. So this trial and error kind of process with gardening, I've decided that perhaps they're not a good companion plant, because normally I get lots of beans. I'm probably a little bit too late with my leeks. I should have really had them in the ground well before this, but at this point I'm growing lots of brassicas. You can see I've got yams in the background. I'll harvest those after the first frosts and the leaves die. At the moment I'm growing 3 different kinds of potatoes. So there's a little purple heritage or Māori potato. This is a Nardine. It's one of my earlier potatoes. It's got a nice waxy flavour to it. These are fingerling potatoes, and for some reason they often end up connected, but they've got a really nice nutty waxy flavour. So generally speaking, because we've got sandy soil, I can leave the potatoes in the ground for a good part of winter and just harvest them as I need them. So we've got a bay here. This is fennel. We mainly use it for the leaves. If you take some of these leaves and put it in a salad, it's a really nice addition. And this is sorrel. It's got a really citrusy flavoured leaf. It's really nice to have a few in a salad as well. You can see that peas and broad beans I did have here, they're kind of past it now. Sadly, I used to have brassicas in this particular garden bed because if it's slightly shady, white butterflies don't attack them quite so much, and but for some reason I ended up with clubroot, which is a bit of a devastating thing to happen to your brassicas, and it means you can't really use that soil again for about 5 years till it's free of the clubroot. So I just have to leave that for brassicas for a bit. But apparently lime is really useful for lessening that issue. So we've got parsnips, carrots. I like growing carrots. They aren't necessarily ones you get in the supermarket. So there's some that have red or purple skins and different coloured flesh. I also have the theory that if you're eating a colourful diet, you're probably getting all the nutrients that you need. And moving through, got beetroot, and this is something I learnt from Noel Peterson, who calls himself the Green Wizard, who lives in Bluff at the moment. He told me that you can actually eat the pods of radishes, and we've now decided we're really sold on them. You can put them in stir fries and salads. They've got a really lovely radishy flavour. You get more to eat from the pods than you do from the actual little roots. So every year we wait for the flowers to appear in the pods, and they're really good to eat. So this is New Zealand spinach, and it's just as good to eat as ordinary spinach. It's really prolific, and often if you just leave it in one spot, it kind of seeds and grows again for the next season. You can see the remains of our corn plants. I'll probably be taking these out shortly and replacing them with brassicas. And heading around this direction, we've just planted some asparagus. I've got a few. These are, you just leave them in the ground. They're a kind of fern, and probably takes about 3 seasons before they'll produce anything to eat. So we've got a few of these. You just leave them in the one spot. And I do grow sunflowers mainly for decorative purposes. I haven't found an easy way of using the seeds yet, but the birds really like them. So if you've got a smaller property, if you're wanting to establish a new garden, raised beds are really easy to manage, and you can have them in various sizes. One thing you probably have to work out is the kind of limiting factors in your garden. So just looking at my notes here, there are probably 6 kinds of soil types: clay, sandy, salty, peaty, chalky and loamy. So the kind of soils you're likely to find in Invercargill would be sandy, peaty and loamy if you're lucky. The thing that probably can't be predicted is the what the land was used for in the past. Sometimes people have dumped a whole lot of things if it's an old property, and things like coal ash. People used to have coal fires, and if they dumped the coal ash in the back of your property, it probably isn't very useful to use for a garden. It's kind of poisonous. So if you've got issues like that, if you have a raised bed, it's really easy to perhaps put some thick pieces of newspaper on the ground and put compost inside your frame, and that kind of mitigates the issue if you've got some poor soil. If you've got really limited space, you can grow a number of things in pots, so there's lots and lots of possibilities of things you can do to grow stuff. And we do a lot of trial and error. Every season can be different. If you're unsure, I always think you can give it a go. And if it works, it works, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. That's just what gardening's all about. I think further down here you can see along the fence, I've started growing some bamboo, and the idea is that not only will it serve as a kind of shelter because the weather comes from the west, but it'll actually provide us with a whole lot of stakes as it matures, so I don't have to buy them from the garden centre. And I think the heart of any functioning garden is compost. As I said, there are 6 kinds of soils, and you have different pHs from acidic through to different other kinds of to alkaline, and you can test your soil and do all those sort of things, but if you just produce plenty of compost, it creates really useful humus in your garden, and is probably the better way of replenishing your soil. So if you're able to produce compost, I'll be talking about that in another workshop, in another video. So if you want to find more about that, you could watch that. And that's my garden.